Mom, did you ever receive the trust payments Dad set up for you? My son Ryan asked that question halfway through Thanksgiving dinner, and for a moment, every sound around the table seemed to disappear. The clink of silverware stopped. The low hum of conversation faded. Even the football game playing softly from the living room television felt miles away. I looked up from my plate of turkey and stuffing and stared at him. What trust payments? I asked. Ryan blinked as if he thought I was joking. Across the table, his wife Claire froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. It was only for a second, but I noticed it. At 71, I had learned that the smallest pauses often carried the biggest secrets. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Christmas came with pressure. Birthdays came with expectations. But Thanksgiving was simple. Family gathered. People shared stories. For a few hours, everyone remembered what mattered. At least, that was what I used to believe. That year, I had arrived carrying a homemade pecan pie and a smile that took more effort than anyone realized. The previous 3 years had been difficult. Since my husband Walter passed away, every dollar seemed to stretch less than it used to. I kept the thermostat lower in winter. I skipped little luxuries. I told myself I was being practical. Retirement wasn't supposed to be glamorous. Still, there were nights when I sat alone in my small Ohio house, staring at overdue bills and wondering how Walter had always made everything seem so easy. Ryan set down his fork. The trust fund, he said carefully. Dad created it before he died. Arthur handled the paperwork. You should have been receiving monthly distributions. My stomach tightened. Trust fund. Monthly distributions. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to somebody else's life. Ryan, I said quietly, I've never received anything like that. Claire finally set down her glass. Maybe there's some misunderstanding, she said with a soft laugh. Legal paperwork can get complicated. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. Ryan turned toward her. Complicated for 3 years? Claire's smile never moved. I'm just saying mistakes happen. The room felt warmer suddenly. My granddaughter Emma looked between her parents with wide eyes. Nobody touched their food. Then Ryan reached beside his chair and picked up a large cream-colored envelope. I hadn't noticed it before. It looked old, slightly bent at one corner. That's why I brought this, he said. Arthur mailed it to my office last week. He said it was important. My pulse began to quicken. Arthur Bennett had been Walter's attorney and closest friend for nearly 40 years. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't careless. If Arthur sent an envelope marked important, it meant something. Ryan slid it across the table toward me. Nobody spoke. Even Claire was staring at it now. The envelope stopped inches from my hands. My name was written across the front in neat blue ink. Margaret Holloway. I recognized Arthur's handwriting immediately. The sight of it sent a chill through me. Slowly, I reached for the envelope. I could feel everyone watching. I could feel Claire watching most of all. Something told me that whatever was inside that envelope was about to change far more than Thanksgiving dinner. I looked up once more and met Claire's eyes. For the first time that evening, she looked afraid, and I still had no idea why. My fingers rested on the edge of the envelope, but I did not open it immediately. Instead, I sat there looking at my name written in Arthur Bennett's familiar handwriting, while memories I had spent years pushing aside began rising to the surface. The truth was that I had become very good at accepting less from life. After Walter died, I convinced myself that struggle was normal. I told myself that every widow had to make adjustments. I stopped buying fresh flowers for the kitchen table because they felt unnecessary. I canceled cable television and kept only the basic channels. During winter, I wore an extra sweater inside the house instead of turning up the heat. None of it seemed dramatic at the time. It was simply the quiet math of survival. Some months were harder than others. There were evenings when I stood in the grocery store comparing prices for 10 minutes over something as simple as a carton of eggs. I remember sitting in my car afterward, staring at the receipt and wondering how everything had become so expensive. Yet every time Ryan called, I told him I was doing fine. That was what mothers did. We protected our children from burdens, even when we became the burden ourselves. Ryan visited less often after his business started growing. I never blamed him for that. Success came with responsibilities. Claire always seemed supportive, always smiling, always reminding everyone how busy life had become. Looking back, I realized she was often the one answering messages, scheduling visits, or explaining why plans had changed. At the time, it seemed helpful. Now I was not so sure. There had been little moments that felt strange. Birthday cards that never arrived. Documents that Ryan insisted had been mailed. Invitations that somehow got lost. Each incident felt too small to question. Too small to turn into conflict. So I ignored them. That was easier. Across the table, Emma shifted nervously in her chair. Ryan was still watching me, waiting for me to open the envelope. Claire had become unusually quiet. She folded and unfolded her napkin with careful movements. The sight unsettled me. Claire was never nervous. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of strangers and make everyone feel comfortable within minutes. Confidence followed her everywhere. Seeing even a crack in that confidence felt wrong. I looked down at the envelope again. Suddenly, I remembered a conversation with Walter from years ago. We had been sitting on our back porch one summer evening, watching fireflies drift across the yard. He had reached for my hand and said, "If anything ever happens to me, I have made sure you will always be taken care of." I had laughed and told him not to talk like that. He only smiled. At the time, I thought he was being sentimental. Now those words echoed in my mind with startling clarity. Slowly, I slid one finger beneath the seal. The paper gave way with a soft tear. The room fell silent. Whatever was inside that envelope had traveled a long road before reaching me. And for the first time in 3 years, I had the feeling that Walter was finally about to answer questions I did not even know I should have been asking. Inside the envelope were several documents clipped neatly together. The first page carried the logo of a financial institution I did not recognize. Beneath it was a statement showing monthly distributions that stretched back more than 3 years. I stared at the numbers. Month after month. Deposit after deposit. Thousands of dollars. My hands began to tremble slightly. "Ryan," I said carefully, "what am I looking at?" He leaned closer and scanned the page. The color drained from his face. "These are the trust payments," he said. "The ones Arthur told me about." I looked back at the document. Every payment was listed. Every transfer appeared complete. According to the records, I had received every dollar. The problem was that I had not. Not 1 cent. A heavy silence settled over the dining room. Emma looked confused. Ryan looked alarmed. Claire remained perfectly still. Too still. I turned another page. There were additional records. Tax summaries. Account activity reports. Correspondence logs. Whoever organized the file wanted the story told in a specific order. I noticed several letters listed as delivered to my residence. I had never seen any of them. "This cannot be right," I whispered. Ryan took the packet from my hands and reviewed the pages himself. His forehead tightened. "The address is correct," he said. "Everything here shows Mom received the paperwork." Claire finally spoke. Maybe there was an error with the bank. Her voice remained smooth, but something felt different now. She was speaking carefully, as though every word needed to be measured. Ryan shook his head. "Banks do not make the same error every month for 3 years." Nobody responded to that. I sat back in my chair and looked around the room. The Thanksgiving decorations. The half-finished plates of food. The pumpkin centerpiece Emma had helped arrange earlier that afternoon. Everything looked normal. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. I remembered the countless times I had worried about money. The repairs I postponed. The medications I stretched longer than recommended. The leaking gutter I could not afford to replace. All while these documents claimed support had been arriving regularly. The thought left a bitter ache in my chest. Then something caught my eye near the bottom of one page. A secondary contact name. My breath stopped. The account listed an authorized communications contact. Someone who could receive notices regarding the trust. I lowered the paper and read the name again to make sure I was not mistaken. Claire Holloway. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Ryan noticed it next. His eyes moved across the line. Then he looked up slowly toward his wife. Claire forced a small smile. "That is probably because I helped organize some paperwork after Walter passed away," she said. It sounded reasonable. In fact, it sounded exactly like something Claire would do. Helpful. Responsible. Efficient. But for the first time since I had known her, the explanation did not sit right with me. Across the table, Emma glanced at her mother, then quickly looked away. I noticed that too. Small details. Tiny cracks. The kind people usually ignore. Ryan closed the folder and exhaled slowly. "I think it is time we call Arthur," he said. Claire lowered her eyes toward her untouched dinner plate. And somehow, that worried me more than anything I had seen inside the envelope. The call to Arthur did not happen that night. By the time Ryan reached for his phone, Arthur had already left a message saying he was traveling and would be available the following morning. It should have frustrated me. Instead, it gave me an entire night to think. After Thanksgiving dinner ended, I drove home beneath a cold Ohio sky and spent hours sitting alone in my kitchen. The envelope rested on the table beside a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. I kept looking at the documents and then looking away. Some truths are easier to face in small pieces. Around midnight, I found myself opening old photo albums. Walter smiled back at me from every stage of our lives. There he was holding Ryan as a baby. There he was teaching him to ride a bicycle. There he was standing beside me on our 30th wedding anniversary. Looking at those photographs, I remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time. During the last year of his life, Walter had become unusually organized. He labeled folders, updated records, made lists for everything. I used to tease him about it. He would laugh and say he wanted to leave nothing unfinished. Back then, I thought he was simply being practical. Now I wondered whether he had been trying to protect me. The next morning, I began noticing things I had ignored for years. Memories surfaced one by one. Claire insisting that certain financial paperwork be sent through her because she was helping Ryan manage family affairs. Claire volunteering to organize documents after Walter passed away. Claire often being the first person to know when letters arrived. None of it had seemed suspicious. In fact, it had seemed generous. That was what troubled me most. Every memory could still be explained as kindness. Yet together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Shortly before noon, my phone rang. It was Emma. Her voice sounded hesitant. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." There was a pause. "Do you remember a few years ago when Mom said you bought a small vacation property?" I sat upright in my chair. "No," I replied, "because I never bought one." Silence followed. Then Emma said something that made my stomach tighten. "That is strange. I remember hearing Mom talk about it. She said you preferred keeping it private." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Another memory suddenly surfaced. 3 summers earlier, Claire had mentioned taking a few weekend trips to a lake community outside Columbus. At the time, I assumed they had rented a place. I never asked questions. Why would I? Families took vacations. That was normal. But now, pieces that never belonged together were beginning to connect. Emma lowered her voice. "Grandma, I probably should not say this, but when I was younger, I saw paperwork with your name on it. I remember because Mom told me not to touch it." My heartbeat quickened. "What kind of paperwork?" "I do not know," she admitted. "But I remember your name." After we ended the call, I sat staring out the kitchen window. Bare tree branches swayed gently in the wind. The world outside looked calm. Inside my mind, however, a storm was building. Because for the first time, I was no longer wondering whether something had gone wrong. I was beginning to wonder how much had been taken from me without my knowledge. The following afternoon, Ryan and I met Arthur Bennett at his office downtown. I had not been there since Walter's estate was settled. The building looked exactly the same. The polished wood reception desk, the framed photographs of local landmarks, the quiet atmosphere that somehow made every conversation feel more important. Arthur greeted us personally. The moment he saw me, his expression softened. "Margaret," he said, shaking his head gently. I was afraid this day might come. Those words stayed with me as we followed him into a conference room. Ryan placed the envelope on the table between us. Arthur adjusted his glasses and opened a thick file folder from his briefcase. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to know one thing. Did you ever receive any of the trust distributions Walter established?" "No," I answered. "Not one." Arthur closed his eyes briefly. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. That worried me. Ryan leaned forward. "Arthur, what exactly did Dad set up?" Arthur opened the folder and removed several documents. Walter created a trust designed to provide Margaret with monthly income for life. He funded it generously. There was also a property purchase completed 2 years before his death. My heart skipped. "Property?" Arthur nodded. "A lake house outside Columbus. Walter wanted Margaret to have a place she could enjoy during retirement." Ryan stared at him. "A lake house." Arthur slid a deed across the table. My name appeared on the document. Margaret Holloway, the legal owner. For a moment I could not breathe. I had spent years worrying about grocery bills while apparently owning a lake house I had never seen. "How is that possible?" Ryan asked. Arthur frowned. Every notice, every tax document, every communication should have gone directly to Margaret. He flipped through additional paperwork. However, there was a secondary contact listed for administrative purposes. None of us needed him to say the name. The silence answered for him. Claire Holloway. Arthur continued carefully. At the time, it did not seem unusual. Claire explained she was helping coordinate family matters while everyone adjusted after Walter's passing. I looked down at the documents. The pages felt heavier with every new detail. Ryan's face had become pale. Are you telling me someone could have intercepted everything? Arthur folded his hands. I am saying that a great deal of correspondence appears to have been redirected. More than I realized. Then he handed me another sheet. It showed maintenance expenses, utility payments, and property fees associated with the lake house. Someone had been using the property regularly. The records covered years. I stared at the dates. Summer weekends. Holiday periods. Even several weeks each year. Whoever had access to the house treated it as their own. Suddenly, Emma's comment from the previous day echoed in my mind. Her mother talking about trips to a lake community. My stomach tightened. Ryan was reading the same records. His jaw clenched. I never knew about any of this, he said quietly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed him completely. Arthur slid one final document across the table. There is something else, he said. And this may explain why I became concerned enough to send that envelope. I lowered my eyes toward the page. At the top was a request to transfer ownership of the lake house. The signature line was supposed to belong to me, but I had never seen the document before. The room seemed smaller after Arthur placed the transfer document in front of us. I studied the signature carefully. It looked similar to mine at first glance. The same looping letters. The same shape to the last name. But the longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. It was like looking at a photograph that had been edited just enough to make something familiar seem strange. That is not my signature, I said quietly. Arthur nodded. That was my concern as well. Ryan took the document and compared it with another page that contained my authentic signature from years earlier. The differences became obvious almost immediately. Small details. The angle of the letters. The pressure marks. The spacing. Things most people would never notice. Ryan looked up slowly. Someone tried to transfer ownership of the property. Arthur folded his hands. The request was rejected before completion because additional verification was required. That is when I started reviewing older records. I felt a chill move through me. If Arthur had not noticed the discrepancy, the lake house might already be gone. Years of trust payments. A property I never knew existed. Documents I never received. Suddenly the scope of everything became impossible to ignore. This was not one mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Ryan stood and walked toward the conference room window. For several moments he said nothing. I could see the weight of realization settling on him. The man who built a successful company through careful planning was now confronting something he never expected inside his own family. How much? He finally asked. Arthur looked down at his records. Including trust distributions, property value, and associated benefits. We are discussing several $100,000 over multiple years. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. I could tell he was doing calculations in his head, trying to understand how something so large had remained hidden. I was asking myself the same question. Then Arthur opened another folder. There is one more issue. Neither of us spoke. The utility records for the lake house show frequent usage. Whoever had access was not treating it as an investment property. It appears they were actively enjoying it. A knot formed in my stomach. Weekend trips. Summer visits. Family vacations. Memories I was never part of suddenly took on a different meaning. Ryan turned back toward the table. Can we visit the property? Arthur nodded. Legally, Margaret still owns it. The drive took less than 90 minutes. I spent most of it staring through the passenger window while Ryan remained unusually quiet behind the wheel. Neither of us knew exactly what we expected to find. As we entered the lake community, my chest tightened. The area was beautiful. Quiet streets. Tall trees. Water sparkling beneath the afternoon sun. The kind of place Walter would have loved. When we finally stopped in front of the house, I felt tears gather in my eyes. It was perfect. A white porch. Blue shutters. Flower boxes beneath the windows. The retirement dream Walter had quietly built for me. Then Ryan pointed toward the driveway. There was a familiar vehicle parked beside the garage. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to Claire. And as we sat there staring at the house that legally belonged to me, the front door opened, and someone stepped outside carrying a set of keys. Ryan and I remained motionless inside the car as the figure stepped onto the porch. For a split second, I expected to see Claire herself. Instead, it was a middle-aged woman carrying grocery bags and chatting on a phone. She walked confidently toward Claire's vehicle, opened the trunk, and placed the bags inside as if she had done it countless times before. "Who is that?" Ryan whispered. I shook my head. I had never seen her before. We watched as she unlocked the front door and disappeared back inside the house. The entire scene felt surreal. The property belonged to me. The trust was intended for me. Yet strangers moved through that house as though I did not exist. Ryan finally stepped out of the car. I followed more slowly. Every step toward the porch felt heavier than the last. As we approached, I noticed details that made my heart ache. Wind chimes hanging near the entrance. Flower beds carefully maintained. A porch swing facing the lake. Walter knew exactly what I loved. He had designed this life for me, and somehow I had never even known it existed. Ryan knocked. A few moments later, the woman opened the door. Her expression shifted from polite curiosity to confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ryan introduced himself and explained that we were trying to understand the ownership history of the property. The woman's face immediately changed. "Ownership," she repeated. "This house belongs to Claire Holloway." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Ryan stared at her. "No," he said carefully. "Legally, it belongs to my mother." The woman blinked several times. "That cannot be right. Claire has been renting it to me for over a year." Neither of us spoke. She stepped aside and invited us inside. The interior was beautiful. Large windows overlooked the water. Family photographs decorated shelves and tables. I stopped when I noticed one picture near the fireplace. Claire stood smiling beside the lake. Emma was there. Ryan was there. They looked happy, comfortable, like a family enjoying a place that was never supposed to be theirs. Ryan saw it too. His face hardened. The woman introduced herself as Denise. She explained that Claire had advertised the property as a private rental. Payments were sent electronically each month. She even produced copies of agreements and receipts from a folder in the kitchen. Every document listed Claire as the authorized representative. Not me. Not the trust. Claire. "I had no idea there was any problem," Denise said nervously. She seemed completely legitimate. I believed her. This woman was not part of the deception. She was another person caught inside it. Ryan reviewed the paperwork while I stood by the window overlooking the lake. The water sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt something shifting inside me. For years I had blamed circumstances for my struggles. Rising costs, bad luck, aging alone. Now I was beginning to understand that my hardship had not been accidental. Someone had built comfort from resources that were meant for me. As we prepared to leave, Denise hesitated. "There is something else," she said quietly. She opened a drawer and removed a spare key. Attached to it was a small tag with faded handwriting. The moment I saw it, tears filled my eyes. The handwriting belonged to Walter, and written on the tag were 4 simple words. "For Margaret. With love." I held the small key tag in my hand during the entire drive home. Ryan kept his eyes on the road, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. Mine was too. For simple words. For Margaret. With love. Walter had left me more than property or money. He had left proof that he never intended for me to struggle. Every sacrifice I had made over the past 3 years suddenly felt different. Every cold winter evening. Every delayed repair. Every anxious glance at a bank statement. None of it had been necessary. By the time we arrived back in Columbus, Ryan had become unusually quiet. That evening, my phone rang. It was Emma. The moment I answered, I heard tears in her voice. "Grandma, I need to tell you something." I sat down at my kitchen table. "What is it, sweetheart?" She hesitated. "I found some old emails on Mom's laptop years ago. I did not understand them at the time. But after everything that has happened, I remembered." My heart began to race. "What kind of emails?" Another pause. "Messages about forwarding mail." I closed my eyes. Emma continued carefully. "There were instructions about changing delivery addresses and receiving copies of documents before they reached other people. I remember because I accidentally opened one while looking for school photos." The room felt very still. Outside, the wind brushed against the bare branches near my window. "Do you still have access to those emails?" I asked. "Maybe." Her voice lowered. "Grandma, I never thought any of it mattered. But now I think it does." The following afternoon, Emma met Ryan and me at a small coffee shop. She looked nervous, far too nervous for a 16-year-old. When she sat down, she immediately handed Ryan a flash drive. I copied everything I could find. Ryan stared at it for several seconds before taking it. "Emma, are you sure about this?" She nodded. "I love Mom. But if she did something wrong, pretending it never happened will not fix it." I felt a surge of pride and sadness at the same time. Emma should never have been placed in this position. Yet there she was, showing more honesty than many adults. Later that evening, Ryan called me. His voice sounded different. Harder. Controlled. "Mom," he said, "the emails are real." I gripped the edge of my chair. "What do they show?" Silence stretched between us. Then he answered. "They show years of planning." He explained that the messages included forwarding requests, account notifications, rental discussions, and communications connected to the property. Most disturbing of all, they revealed that Claire had been actively monitoring correspondence linked to the trust. Not occasionally, consistently, methodically, for years. I looked toward the key tag resting on my kitchen counter. For Margaret. With love. Walter had spent a lifetime building security for me. Someone else had spent years quietly taking control of it. "There is more," Ryan said. "The emails mention another account." I felt my stomach tighten. "Another account?" "Yes." His voice became very quiet. "And according to the records, that account received money every month. Money that should never have left your trust." The next few days felt unreal. Every time I believed we had uncovered the worst of it, another piece surfaced. Ryan worked late into the night reviewing records with Arthur. I stayed home, trying to make sense of a life that suddenly looked very different from the one I thought I had been living. On Monday afternoon, Ryan arrived carrying a thick binder. He placed it on my kitchen table without saying a word. The look on his face told me everything before he even opened it. "We found the account," he said quietly. My chest tightened. Ryan sat down across from me and began turning pages. Bank statements, transfer records, electronic payment confirmations. The evidence stretched back years. Month after month, trust distributions intended for me had been redirected through a complicated chain of transactions. Not enough to attract immediate attention. Not enough to trigger automatic warnings. Just enough to disappear quietly. "How much?" I asked. Ryan hesitated. "More than $200,000. I stared at him. The number felt impossible. I thought about the leaking roof I delayed repairing. The medical appointments I postponed because I worried about costs. The old sedan I kept driving long after it should have been replaced. $200,000. Ryan continued turning pages. "Arthur believes the money helped fund maintenance on the lake house, rental operations, travel expenses, and several personal accounts." I looked down at the records. There it was in black and white. The life Walter intended for me had been slowly transferred somewhere else. For a moment, anger threatened to overwhelm me. But what surprised me most was not the anger. It was the sadness. Claire had sat at my table for years, shared holiday meals, celebrated birthdays, hugged me at family gatherings, all while knowing exactly what she was doing. Later that evening, Emma called again. Her voice sounded exhausted. "Mom has been acting strange," she said. "She keeps making phone calls and leaving the room." I listened carefully. "Does she know anyone is investigating?" "I do not think so," Emma replied. "But she seems nervous." After we ended the call, I sat alone in my living room watching snow begin to fall outside. The first flakes drifted past the window in silence. I remembered all the times I defended Claire when friends questioned her behavior. All the times I assumed misunderstandings had simple explanations. Trust is a remarkable thing. It allows families to function. It also creates perfect hiding places for deception. The following morning, Arthur called with new information. "Margaret," he said, "we obtained records connected to the attempted property transfer." I gripped the phone tighter. "And the request was submitted only 3 months ago." I closed my eyes. 3 months. After years of redirected money and hidden ownership arrangements, someone had tried to take the final step. Someone believed they were close to securing everything permanently. Arthur's voice grew serious. Whoever submitted that request thought they had already won. After the call ended, I looked at Walter's key tag resting beside the binder of evidence. "For Margaret. With love." For years, that promise had been buried beneath lies. Now the truth was finally emerging. And somewhere across town, Claire still believed her secrets were safe. The strange thing about deception is that once it begins to unravel, People rarely notice immediately. Life continues. Schedules remain the same. Conversations sound normal. On the surface, everything appears untouched. Yet beneath it all, pressure builds. That week, Claire behaved exactly as she always had. She attended meetings, posted cheerful family photos online, sent holiday messages. If someone had looked at her from the outside, they would have seen a successful woman living a comfortable life. But now I knew what existed behind the image. Ryan knew too. Arthur advised patience. Do not confront her yet, he said. People reveal more when they believe they are safe. It was difficult advice to follow. Every instinct told me to demand answers. Yet I understood the wisdom in waiting. For years, Claire had operated because nobody questioned her. The moment she realized questions were being asked, everything could change. 2 days later, Ryan called me after work. I think she is preparing something, he said. What do you mean? There was a pause. She asked unusual questions tonight. My stomach tightened. About what? About investments, property values, long-term planning. He sounded exhausted. She even brought up relocating. I stared out my living room window as snow continued falling outside. Relocating where? California. The answer surprised me. Ryan continued. She talked about fresh starts, better opportunities, different markets. I immediately thought about the failed transfer request Arthur had discovered. 3 months earlier, someone had attempted to secure ownership of the lake house. Now Claire was discussing major life changes. The timing felt impossible to ignore. Later that evening, Arthur forwarded additional records, property inquiries, communications with real estate professionals, preliminary discussions regarding future listing strategies. None of them were enough to prove wrongdoing on their own. But together they painted a picture. Someone was preparing for the next chapter. Someone expected certain assets to remain under their control. The following afternoon, Emma visited my house. We baked cookies together the way we had when she was younger. For a little while, life felt normal again. Then she said something unexpected. Grandma, Mama's been cleaning out old files. I stopped stirring the batter. What kind of files? Boxes from the home office. Documents. Storage folders. She looked worried. She usually keeps everything. But suddenly she is throwing things away. A cold feeling settled over me. Arthur had been right. Claire still believed she was safe, but somewhere deep down she sensed change approaching. That evening, Ryan called once more. His voice sounded calmer than it had in days. I need you to trust me, he said. I do. Then let her keep thinking everything is normal. I understood immediately. The investigation was no longer about discovering the truth. We already had much of it. Now it was about allowing the final pieces to reveal themselves. Before ending the call, Ryan told me one last thing. Earlier that afternoon, Claire had scheduled a private meeting for the following week. A meeting connected to property transactions. Property she had no legal right to control. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my kitchen. The binder of evidence rested beside Walter's key tag. Snow drifted past the window. Somewhere across town, Claire believed she was planning her future. What she did not realize was that every step she took was leading directly toward the moment when the truth would finally catch up with her. The invitation went out 3 days later. Ryan called it a family dinner. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just an opportunity for everyone to gather before the holiday season became too busy. Claire agreed immediately. That alone told me she suspected nothing. On the evening of the dinner, I arrived early. Arthur was already there. So was Emma. The dining room looked warm and welcoming. Candles flickered softly. Plates were arranged neatly. To anyone walking through the front door, it appeared to be an ordinary family gathering. Yet resting inside Arthur's briefcase was enough documentation to expose years of deception. Claire arrived smiling. She carried a bottle of wine and greeted everyone exactly as she always had. Polite, relaxed, confident. Watching her was unsettling. If I had not seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might still have believed every word she said. Throughout dinner, conversation remained light. Emma spoke about school. Ryan discussed work. Claire laughed at the right moments. She even asked if I needed help around the house during winter. The performance was flawless. Finally, dessert was served. Ryan set down his fork and looked across the table. There is something we need to discuss. The room became quiet. Claire glanced toward him, surprised but not yet concerned. Arthur opened his briefcase. I saw the first hint of uncertainty appear in Claire's eyes. Ryan placed a folder on the table. We visited the lake house. Claire froze. Only for a second, but it was enough. What lake house? She asked. Ryan slid a photograph across the table. The picture showed the property clearly. The porch, the blue shutters, the driveway. Claire stared at it. Nobody spoke. Then Arthur placed another document beside the photograph. The deed. My deed. The one carrying my name. Claire's expression changed again. Not panic. Calculation. I can explain, she said calmly. Then explain the rental agreements, Ryan replied. More documents appeared. Bank records. Email records. Transfer records. One by one, the evidence covered the table. The confidence that had protected Claire for years began slipping away. Emma lowered her eyes. I could tell this was painful for her. It was painful for all of us. Claire looked toward Ryan. You are not seeing the full picture. Then help me understand it, he answered. His voice remained steady. Help me understand why my mother never received her trust distributions. Silence. Help me understand why property in her name was rented to strangers. More silence. Help me understand why someone attempted to transfer ownership 3 months ago using a signature that was not hers. Claire stared at the documents. For the first time since I had known her, she had no answer ready. The room felt impossibly still. Years of secrets had finally reached the surface. Then Arthur removed one final folder from his briefcase and placed it gently on the table. Before anyone says another word, he said, there is one more document everyone needs to see. Arthur opened the folder slowly and removed a single document. Compared to the stacks of financial records and property files already covering the table, it looked almost insignificant. Yet the moment he placed it in front of Claire, her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of change that only appears when someone realizes a situation has become impossible to control. What is that? Ryan asked. Arthur adjusted his glasses. An affidavit. Nobody spoke. Arthur continued. After the transfer request was submitted, questions were raised regarding authorization. As part of the review process, several statements were collected. Claire stared at the paper without touching it. Ryan looked from Arthur to the document. What kind of statements? Arthur folded his hands. Statements from service providers, financial representatives, and individuals who interacted with the account administration over the past several years. My heart beat steadily now. The fear that had followed me for weeks was gone. In its place was clarity. Arthur turned the document so everyone could see. Several names appeared on the pages. Individuals who had worked with the trust. Individuals who had handled property matters. Individuals who confirmed that communications had repeatedly been directed through Claire rather than through me. One statement stood out above all the others. It came from a representative who specifically recalled being instructed not to contact Margaret Holloway directly because all family matters were being handled elsewhere. Ryan read the page twice. Then a third time. The room remained silent except for the soft ticking of a clock in the hallway. Finally, Claire spoke. I was trying to help. The words sounded smaller than everything that had come before. Ryan looked at her carefully. Help who? She opened her mouth, but did not answer immediately. The situation was complicated, she said. Your father left a mess of paperwork. Someone had to manage it. Arthur calmly slid another document forward. Management does not include redirecting trust distributions. Another page followed. Management does not include collecting rental income from property you do not own. Another page. Management does not include submitting ownership transfer requests under questionable circumstances. Claire lowered her eyes. Across the table, Emma sat perfectly still. I could only imagine how difficult this moment was for her. Yet she never looked away. Ryan leaned back in his chair. For several seconds, he simply stared at the woman he had trusted for years. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. That somehow made it more powerful. You let my mother struggle. Claire looked up immediately. That was never my intention. But it happened. Silence. You watched it happen. More silence. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. The evidence had already done the speaking. I looked down at Walter's key tag resting beside my plate. For Margaret. With love. For years those words had been buried beneath deception. Now they sat in plain view. Ryan slowly gathered the documents into a single stack. There is only one thing left to decide, he said quietly. Claire looked at him. For the first time all evening, she seemed uncertain about what would happen next. And neither of them had yet seen the final set of records Arthur had brought with him.